Hello and welcome to the latest in the Leaders with Ambition podcast series. And today I am absolutely delighted to welcome my guest, Nick Waterworth. Now, some would say Nick could be the ultimate leader with ambition, as he is the founder and chairman of Ambition. So also my boss. So I'm going to be very nice in this podcast today. It's a really interesting story ahead. We've got Nick, who grew up in the UK, and then kind of found recruitment, and recruitment found him maybe, and how he then started to develop his career and decided to move over to Australia, which is a really interesting stage of his life. It then leads to him growing and developing Ambition as a firm, and the amount of real value-led system that he based and put into wanting to grow Ambition. It leads to some challenging times, which Nick will share with us, and also some real highlights, particularly Nick around some of his various locations that he subsequently grew. He'll also share with us some insights around ED&I, hybrid working, and also the challenge that we faced as a firm with COVID, but how he really used that time to start to focus Ambition on its next iteration. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick to bring his career history to life for us. So Nick, over to you. What was Nick growing up like?
Thanks, Nikki. And I really appreciate being asked. It's a very prestigious series that you have. So I'm delighted to take part. Yeah, so I was born and brought up in Warwick in the UK. My dad had been in the army. He was in the Second World War and in fact was a prisoner of war for 12 months. And then after the war, they had lived in Palestine and Greece and Malaya, as it then was, before going back to the UK. And he was posted to Budbrook Barracks in Warwick, which is where Nicholas popped into the world. So I then went to Warwick School, was back in the generations when almost everybody walked to school if you possibly could. I did that. I was a kind of quite spectacularly poor student at school. I was very keen on sport and played rugby, to a reasonable level, but academically, kind of nothing really interested me. And as a consequence, I achieved not much until going into year 11, or as they called it, the lower sixth back then. I chose to do economics and economic history, which was taught by a teacher called Martin Green. And I think most people have one, and he was mine. He was an incredible teacher. He was a fascinating person. For me at the time, mainly because he was a massive Monty Python fan, as was I. And this was made all the more appealing because certainly my parents hated Monty Python. So to have a teacher that liked it made him, even, as I say, even more appealing. He was extremely clever. He was also the coach of the first 15 rugby team. So he was just like my hero. And from, as I said, being pretty hopeless, suddenly there was this person who took an interest, and I wanted to do well for him. And that course, that 2 years with him, maybe changed my life. It certainly changed my school career and got me through with with an acceptable results in the A level, where I was, in the A levels where I was drifting towards, very, very poor results.
Did you ever tell him, Nick? Did you subsequently, did you have a conversation to let him know the impact he had on you?
Definitely. I have, and in fact, during COVID, he something popped up maybe on the website or something for the school, and he was doing a podcast like this on the economic history of Warwickshire. So I joined along with, I think, something like 55 people from my year group.
Wow.
Which long time ago. So that shows what an appeal he had. So
yeah.
I definitely shared with him, how much I appreciated that and enjoyed working with him. So that was, that was a big effect in my, I think in my life. As a result of doing reasonably well at school in economics and economic history, I decided to do that at university, like a lot of people back then. So I chose to go to York University because A, they offered the course that I wanted to do, but perhaps B, more importantly, it was a long way from Warwick. And that's trying to go to university, which was a long way from home. York ended up being great. It was a great 3 years. I liked the Yorkshire people. The course was quite decent.
Heavily involved in sport again, Nick, there?
Yeah, I did. I again played rugby, lucky enough to play it wasn't any great standard, but it was just so much fun. I was lucky enough to play in the first team for 3 years, and yeah, had a lot of fun. During on the Saturdays, we used to play against club sides around Yorkshire, and that was, for a 20-year-old, there were some pretty tough lessons you learnt there. Playing against this, steel mining village rugby team. That was reasonably.
I can imagine.
But I look back very fondly on those times. So so that was the late 70s, believe it or not. And
did you know what you wanted to do then, Nick, though? Because it sounds, you wanted to obviously study something you were passionate about. You knew you wanted to go to university. What was the next step?
The next step was to not go into a career job. So I was very focused on doing a job, saving some money, and then doing some travel for a year. So I had really what was quite a fun job, putting up marquees for weddings and parties and stuff back in Warwick, which wasn't all that well paid, but I was living at home, and it was a lot of fun. And I thought, this was great. I'll do this for 6 or 9 months, and I'll do some travel. My mum and dad didn't think this was such a good idea, so they were encouraging me or pressurizing me, whichever way you want to look at it, to apply for, career jobs. The only thing I knew on the sort of career side was that if I was going to do a serious job, it was going to be in London, because I thought that was, first of all, that was going to be fun. And, that's where maybe the best prospects were. And through and, immediately after uni, that was the plan. And kind of strangely, one of the things that I'd done best at uni was statistics. When I say strangely, because it's not kind of my thing, but I did very well at stats. So I thought I'll apply for jobs that have got something to do with that area. And I applied for a company who were on the Strand in London, and they called me down for an interview. So that's good. So off I go. We start the interview for this management information and statistician job. And halfway through the interview, they stopped and said, "We don't think you're appropriate for this job." As I said, I was quite focused on putting up my marquees. So I sort of didn't really mind, but I was a bit disappointed not even to make it through the whole of the interview.
Yeah.
I can remember that. But they said, "However, we're looking for trainee recruitment consultants. Would you like to apply for that?" And I had no idea what that meant, but said yes. So they interviewed me for that. And 10 days later, an offer letter popped through the front door. And that was how I got into recruitment.
Fantastic. And so you moved to London. So you tick one box because you always wanted to live and work in London, and you started your career in recruitment. Was it what you expected it to be? You didn't know what it was going to be like. Did it achieve your expectations?
Well, I think where it exceeded my expectations was how much fun it was. Mm. I had this picture of, a sort of serious career job was kind of all work, not much humor, very serious. Perhaps because one of the, we all did work experience going through school. Yeah. And one of the places I went was into a quantity surveyor's office. And that was literally like watching paint dry. That was not the most interesting thing. So I sort of thought all jobs were like that. But in fact, so I joined this little company on the Strand, and it was a lot of fun. The training was pretty good. So it exceeded my expectations from that point of view. I definitely enjoyed living in London. I lived with my brother for a short while and then went to share an apartment with a couple of people I was at university with. So London was great, and the job, was more fun than I expected.
The food wasn't great in London back then, though, Nick. That's changed a bit, hasn't it?
No, probably back then food wasn't a big priority for me, but you bet how it has changed big style. You did right.
Yeah. So you started to develop your career, and I think you were there for a short period of time and felt that it was time to move on to a slightly bigger company, but a company that maybe had more focus, more drive. And you went and interviewed at Michael Page.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the first place on the Strand, as I said, was a good company, but they weren't focused on growth, which is fine. That was their business, and so it felt like wasn't really anywhere to go in that company. So, and we had started to find that we were competing regularly with Michael Page. So I came to the conclusion that it was time to move on. I was only there a year or just over a year, which felt a bit awkward. You really didn't, back then, you didn't move sort of in under at least 2 years. So it felt a bit awkward, but I was pretty sure I was doing the right thing.
And Nick, was your career in focus yet, or was it more around, wanting to be able to do the next thing? Had you started to think this could be it for me?
Definitely, yeah. So in hindsight, my dear old mum and dad were right. It was, I enjoyed having a career. I enjoyed being in London. So the marquee erecting days were behind me. So so I was focused on a career, hence the reason to try and go to a bigger place with more prospects. So I just applied out of the blue to Michael Page. They weren't advertising for people, and went through a bunch of interviews and managed to get in and join their banking recruitment team in January 1982. So long time ago.
It's quite a small company back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It was Michael Page back then was only London and Manchester. Birmingham started shortly after I joined. There must have been maybe 30 people in the whole company. Each day when I arrived, I'd walk past Michael Page, who was sitting at his desk. So it was very small, but there was something in the atmosphere there. I just knew it was a company going places. They had good people, and they were very, in the right way, very commercially minded, but they cared about their people, and they did things well. So so that was a door that opened, and I'm really glad it did. That's because I was there for a long time and had some pretty amazing experience in a company that really grew very fast during that time.
Yeah. And you decided that then your career is now established, as you think this is what you want to do. So you then get very focused on developing yourself and growing teams, didn't you, as part of Michael Page? You were a big part in the UK. What happened? How did you end up in Australia? It's not that close.
So, so I'd been in London for 3 years, working for the manager of the banking team, who was good at developing a young professional. I was very grateful for what he did. So if I take you back to December 1984, I was sitting in the office around Holborn, and the phone rang. I picked up the phone, Nick Waterworth, and on the other end of the phone was Nick. It's Michael. I won't try and do the Cockney accent, but Michael Page was a bit of a gruff Cockney bloke, and literally said, "Nick, I need to talk to you. Come down and see me right now." So I hung up the phone and thought, well, clearly I'm going to be fired. I don't know what I've done, but there's only one reason Michael would want to talk to me. So I better go down and see him. So I walked down to his office, and he called me and said, "All right, sit there, Nick. We need to have a chat." He said, "Okay, we're going to open an office in Australia. It's going to be Sydney. We want you to go. If you could tell me tomorrow. Now, do you have any questions?" Now, I do not exaggerate. That was the beginning and end of the conversation. Thankfully, I didn't have any questions, because it's binary, yes or no. I was 25, single. It's literally, do you want to go to Australia and help, be involved in a brand new office or not? Any questions I had would have been done. As I said, it was a binary situation. So the next day I said yes. In hindsight, I think for that situation where it was a new office, other side of the world, plenty of things are going to go wrong, probably more art than science. He was absolutely right to run the conversation like that, to not give me much information, because he needed somebody who was going to sort of roll with the punches and so on. So I actually think that was very clever. I also think probably it's a bit unfortunate that you or I could no more have that style of conversation with how the Flight of the Moon. But so that was December '84, and something like, well, I landed in Australia on the 1st of February 1985. So
and the rest of those is history. So when you obviously got this offer, I know that your parents were influential in some of the decision-making process when you're younger, which is as it is. Did you then speak to them and get advice from them?
I did. So I can remember I drove up to Warwick that night and talked to mum and dad. As I mentioned, they'd lived overseas, albeit in the army and dealing with various tricky situations, but they had a very international background. My brother at the time was working in Africa, having previously been in South America and the US. So there was kind of quite a lot of international stuff in the family.
Yeah.
So I went and spoke to them. Company want me to go to Australia for 2 years. What do you think? And Dad said, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm pretty keen. He said, well, you should go. You should definitely go. Now, I was the youngest and possibly sort of the closest, certainly to my mum, I think, of the kids. That must have been very hard. Looking now as a parent myself, with my son Harry is the same age as I was then. That's not easy, but they so did the right thing. You know, if you feel it's good for you, if you feel it's good for your career, you must go. They obviously didn't.
They probably thought you were coming back though, Nick. That's why.
Most definitely they did, as did I. I thought I would be coming back. So so I talked to them, and I mean, how good is that to have parents who just back you, and it's nothing to do with their agenda or their thoughts or their sensitivities. So I thought that was fantastic.
Great parenting there. And so you land in Australia. As you say, you'd not been to Sydney or Australia before, and very different sort of networking land than you would get these days. These days, everybody knows somebody who can connect you, or you've met somebody on LinkedIn, or there is, we've got a more globalization way of working anyway. So you probably would have had some connections. How was it then when you landed?
Very hard, but that's all we knew, of course. It wasn't that we had LinkedIn in the UK and you didn't have it in Australia. There was no interweb, as they say. So it was hard slog, but each victory was incredibly satisfying. Landing a new client, completing assignments, which we did at a much lower pace than we'd done in London because it was a total startup. But so it was hard slog. Literally pounding the pavements, shoe leather up and down Pitt Street and George Street in Sydney. Yeah, it was hard work, but it was good work. And within perhaps a year, I can remember thinking, this is going to work. We're going to build a business here. Now, I was a millionaire. I wasn't running it or anything. I was kind of working for the director of the office, but I could sense that we were onto something, and this was going to work.
And during that period of time, I know you said at times you did think, what have I done? But for you, there was no going back. You were determined to succeed, and you threw yourself into more of the sporting life as well to build connections, didn't you?
Yes, I certainly did sport, to build personal connections. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, so I played rugby, I played squash, and but not because I thought I'd meet people for work, but because I enjoyed doing that, and it was a great way to meet people. Funnily enough, Sydney was, and I think probably still is, not that easy a city to kind of break into socially. People,
Right.
I think maybe because a hell of a lot of people in Sydney grow up in Sydney, go to school in Sydney, go to uni in Sydney, and then work in Sydney. So they're very, it's not that transient to society as perhaps London is, certainly cities like Hong Kong maybe. So it was a little hard to break into from a friendship point of view. So that's where sport was great. But I don't sort of know, sometimes it might be a weakness, but I'm not very good on giving up on stuff. I can remember, my first year at uni, one of the requirements was to study philosophy, a unit in philosophy. Well, I literally couldn't understand that. Like, I just couldn't get it at all. And I had a couple of dark moments about, well, maybe I'm going to have to give this away, but I just refused to do it. It was a bit like that in Australia. And it was a bit, so the first 12 months overall was a bit up and down, but I kind of sort of grit my teeth and just ploughed on. And after about 12 months, things began to fall into place, both socially and the business really started to take off.
I'll definitely vouch that you're a determined man, Nick, having seen it in real life. So things started to develop, and as you say, 12 months, you knew something good was happening. How quickly did you scale your career up then?
I'd been brought out to Australia to start the banking recruitment area. That's what I've been doing in London. And I guess it was probably maybe 18 months in, roughly, when I became a manager of that area and we started to recruit some other people to really get some momentum going in that team. That was a real learning curve, and not all of it went, smoothly. I think maybe as a lot of people, when they first go into any sort of leadership role, I was a pretty black and white type of person, and at times too black and white in my approach to leadership. So I had to, kind of get some coaching on that. I knew that I liked it. I liked the idea of doing that job, and I liked the idea of trying to develop people. But, I had a few elbows getting in the way to start with, but thankfully we worked our way through those.
And then you developed, grew teams, and managed to work your way into being the managing director for Sydney as well. Did you feel then that you had achieved everything? Did you feel that all your focus had come to fruition?
So what happened was the managing director of Michael Page, proposed to the board to start a business in Hong Kong. And he went to London to make the presentation, and essentially they said, well, yes, on one condition. He said, so what condition is that? You have to go and start Hong Kong. So this person called Paul moved from Sydney to Hong Kong and suggested, thankfully, that I was made managing director of the Australian business, which I was. So Paul and I, we'd become quite close. So even though he was in Hong Kong, we were still working very closely together, and that will come back later on in this story. So so that would have been 96, I think, just before the handover. So so I was running the Australian business and subsequently New Zealand. So that was Sydney and Melbourne, and a small office in Wellington in New Zealand. That was great. I mean, by that stage, the economy was strong. We were going really well. As I say, it was sort of two main offices in Australia, but they were very good. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That was a great time in my career. It was good.
So everything's going really well. You've achieved this great role, and you decide to do something a little different. So do you want to explain your story, the next stage of your life, Nick?
Yeah, sure. So I've mentioned playing rugby. So Paul and I were also pretty big fans of watching rugby. So we decided he came down to Australia, and we went down to Melbourne to watch the Australians play the New Zealanders at rugby and duly get thumped, as we usually do against And I'd had my car trucked down to Melbourne because we were going to drive from Melbourne to Perth, so across the continent, because Australians were playing in Perth the next weekend, and we thought this would be a really good idea.
And how long's that drive? It's not like traveling across the UK, is it?
3 different time zones. It took 3.5 days, but was amazing. I mean, just incredible. Quite a lot of desert, but other than that, incredible scenery, small towns, and just a great feeling when we drove into Perth. We'd cross the continent. Anyway, on that drive, aside from, enjoying that achievement, we got talking about starting a business together. And when we got to Perth, we're going to do this, subject to getting back home and talking to our partners. We thought we should do this. I have to say, we didn't have a really clearly formed idea of what the business was going to be, but we knew we were going to do something together. So we got back to Sydney, and within a week or so, we flew to London to resign. That was quite tough because we weren't leaving because we didn't like it. Au contraire, Paul was enjoying Hong Kong and I was enjoying my job, and, it was all good. But we just had this, this idea that the time was right. We both had turned 40, and instead of buying a Porsche, we decided to start a business. So we resigned, and then we had a year out, partly notice period, and then some restrictive covenants, before we started the business.
And I know I remember you saying to me that actually that year out was really good in 2 ways. One, it gave you the opportunity to probably disconnect from a company that, as you say, you loved and you were successful in, and to really think about what you wanted to form for a company and how you would make it work. But also it coincided with the birth of your first son, Harry. So it gave you the opportunity to spend time with him, which you would never have had back then in your career.
Exactly right. So, yeah, I mean, I've been at the company 17 years, and, it was very good to have some time out to sort of extricate myself from that way of thinking and that way of doing things. But as you say, more importantly, so that was August 1998 that we resigned, and in the next month, September, Harry was born. And obviously now, quite rightly, it's much more common for both parents to have more time with kids, but it was unusual then. But I just loved that. That was fantastic. So that was great. So I was with him a lot in the first year of his life. So that was great stuff. Yeah.
So then you and Paul started to form Ambition, and what was at the core of what you wanted Ambition to be and to be able to formulate?
We actually took the time to look at different type, to study different types of business.
Yeah.
But quite quickly, literally travel and different things, and quite quickly realised that was madness, because what we knew was recruitment, and we liked recruitment, and we thought we could, do something interesting in that space. But we did look at some other things. So that was that was the first step, and then essentially what we looked at was the things that we thought Michael Page did well, and thought, well, we're not going to change things just for the sake of it, and some of the things that we thought weren't so good, and we won't have those. So that was that was a useful process. I mean, for example, Michael Page were, and I suspect are, a very well organised, financially strong business with good planning, very strong culture, focus on promoting people internally. With all those things were really good. So we'll do those as as some of the starting points. So we went through that process. We decided very early that we were interested in building an international business. We thought the market in Australia was good, but having been in such an international company, and whilst we directly had experience, for the last few years only in Asia and Australia. We had exposure through, being in part of the leadership team to the UK and other markets. So we decided that we wanted to build an international business. That was quite important to us. And we also decided that we wanted, so values were very important to Paul and I. So we wanted a business that cared about our people, about our stakeholders. So that was something we were really going to build into the organisation. Was I talked about, being financially strong and lots of planning and so on, yes, but not to become a rigid, uncaring organisation. That was an anathema to us. We wanted something that an early boss of mine had said to me, "You reap what you sow," and that had stuck with me. And so we wanted, to focus on that.
And so you started Ambition once your restricted covenants had finished. And I think pretty much from day one, you knew it was going to work. I remember you saying to me, you felt really confident. You knew what you were doing. You had yourself in your lanes. Why was that?
As I said, in being in lanes. So one of the things that we'd learned was that, a laser focus, not trying to be all things to all people, was what worked in our sector. So that was that was great that we learned that. So I think we were, we adopted that. So we didn't try and spread ourselves too thin. Early on we were focused just on accounting and banking. After a couple of years we introduced technology, but that, so it was narrow, if you like, and we adopted, or actually Paul came up with a phrase that we still use, inch wide, mile deep, and that, in many ways kind of sums up our strategy to do a small number of things but push very, very deeply into them. Actually, talking of the planning phase, so we started in August 99 when the internet was first coming along. And we'd got kind of everything organised, and sort of almost as an afterthought realised, oh, blimey, we haven't thought of a name for the business. And as soon as we started talking about that, the easy thing was we didn't want our two names to be in that. But we came up with this name, eCareers, which we thought was incredibly cool, internet happening, and we just thought this was fantastic. We thought, well, we better go along to a graphic design to have them look at it and give us some advice. So we went to see this firm and told them our story, and the objective was a very crowded marketplace. We want to stand out from the crowd, and we'd like a name that isn't our two names, but is a little bit webby, a little bit internety. By the way, we've got this name eCareers and we really like that. So they said, okay, come back in 2 weeks. So back we go. And as they do in design, they reiterate the brief back to you. So crowded marketplace, you want to stand out from the competitors, but you'd like something contemporary and a bit webby. And then they said, if you want to be the same as everybody else, you should go ahead and call yourself eCareers, because everybody's doing that. If you want to be different, and they held up a board with Ambition written on it, we think you should call yourself Ambition. And clearly they were expecting a bit of a stoush because they knew how keen Paul and I were on eCareers. And I remember distinctly, we looked at each other, yep, just perfect. And amazingly, the name was available, the URL was available. Yeah. We could get it all happening. So that was a young designer called Stephen who came up with that.
You owe him one, Nick.
I'm more than one. So you now could be working for eCareers, but thankfully you're working for Ambition.
Thank God it's Ambition. Bleeding green, as we say. And quite early on, you and Paul decided you wanted investment, and you did an IPO very early on in the process, didn't you? Again, what was the thinking behind that?
Well, we had some seed capital that we were happy to commit to the business. But in our planning, we realized that to scale up reasonably quickly, we didn't have enough. So we needed to get some outside capital and literally didn't know how to do that. So I said, look, I have this client whose name is Paul Young. He works in Sydney at a British merchant bank called Morgan Grenfell. Let's go and talk to him. He does that sort of thing. So I rang Paul and told him what was happening. He said, oh, okay, let's meet now, said Paul. So I thought it was quite interesting. And he meant today. Interestingly, he had just done a deal in the recruitment sector. He'd done an acquisition in the recruitment sector. So he was reasonably up to speed with it and quite interested in the sector. So we went to see Paul. And after a couple of meetings, he came up with the idea of listing the business, essentially listing a business plan. And he said, I think this will position you for the future very well. And the market's strong. And I think you probably can do it. So instead of going for private equity, talking to a venture capital firm, we listed it, and Paul did two things. He subscribed some money himself, and we asked him to come onto the board, which he did. So that was very clever. So he went from being simply an outside advisor to being a fellow shareholder and on the board. And Paul is still on the board to this day and has become one of my closest advisors and confidants.
Which is fantastic, isn't it? And I think, you talk about people having an impact on your life, and I know you've got a friendship now as well, but that was definitely something that really has stuck out for you, hasn't it, over the years, and a mentoring capacity as well. And as a soundboard, maybe it's more as a...
Definitely. I mean, Paul and I, we are friendly, but we don't see each other outside of work. And actually, I think that's really good. So it is very much a business relationship. He's one of the cleverest people I've ever worked with. I mean, he's seriously got a great brain. He's also really pragmatic and very calm. One of the things, for example, that I've learned from Paul is obviously in business, every now and then you get a bit, something's going wrong, you're having a bit of disagreement with somebody, with whether it's the competition or, whatever it is. You come across these situations. And something that Paul taught me early in his tenure as a director was when you're in that situation, you've almost got to physically imagine putting yourself in their chair. Think about it, literally imagine you're in their situation. And that's actually a really good way to understand maybe where they're coming from, and often helps come up with resolutions. So that was just one example, but he's been a very wise advisor for all those years.
Is there anyone else that you think has had a similar impact on you, Nick?
My wife.
Yeah.
For sure. She's been involved in various businesses, all her adult life. So she's got a very strong business brain. There's also a great reader of people. And as you might imagine, not afraid to tell me that either I'm taking myself too seriously or I'm looking at things the wrong way, if that's the case. So, that's been fantastic. I'm pleased that we don't work together. Some people do really well with being partners in life and partners in the business, but I don't think that would work for us. But she's been very supportive, particularly, for example, because I travel a lot.
Yeah.
And he just takes that in her stride. It's just not a problem. So so that's good. But I do value having, whether it's sort of formal mentors or simply people who you trust and can look to for advice in different situations. And a few years ago, we, through various means, ended up with a couple of people involved who subsequently I couldn't put in that same category, and that's horrible. And so, I really focus on doing business with and involving people who I do trust and can get counsel from. It's a very important thing.
And I think one of the positives for you is that you are open to being challenged and for people to give viewpoints as well. And, your first response isn't no, because it's not my way. It is to listen. And then sometimes you still say no, but at least listen.
Definitely. We also talked about, I touched on the sort of values side of things. I might just talk about something, again, a phrase Paul came up with. He said, for us to do, he said, we've got a good plan and, we know what we're doing. For us to do really well, we have to pass the barbecue test.
Yeah. And
this is the best example of passing the barbecue test I've ever come across. So after we'd been going maybe 7, 8, 9 years, we employed in Sydney somebody in our technology team who was an Irish lady, was with us for just over 5 years, was fantastic. She was just excellent at her job. She, for some reason, decided she wanted to move back to Ireland from Sydney, which still perplexes me, but she decided that she and her partner were going to do that. And what they decided to do was go traveling before they got back to Ireland and started working again. And they were in Guyana in South America. They'd spent the day snorkeling and swimming at a beach. And they finished doing that and they went to a little beach bar to have a drink at the end of the day. And literally at the other end of the table was a noisy group of Aussies having more than one drink. And they weren't really taking much notice until the conversation with these noisy Australians got on to recruitment. And basically the theme of the conversation was how they all thought recruiters were horrible and kind of necessary evil and all these terrible descriptions of recruitment firms. And one of the people stood up and said, well, I disagree. I was placed in my last job by a firm called Ambition, and they were fantastic and they really listened to what I wanted. That's passing the barbecue test. And this Irish lady and her partner felt pretty cool about that. So
it doesn't get much better, does it?
Yeah, but we really believe in that. Like, if you can pass the barbecue test, if you can have your stakeholders being your advocates, that's incredibly powerful stuff. And and never mind that, it's also very satisfying. When you hear stories like that, whether it's me or any of our people, you feel good to be involved with a business that has that sort of reputation. So that was the barbecue test.
Yeah, keep that one front of mind. And so you started to grow out Ambition, and you did start to look at other offices overseas. And first of all, you launched Hong Kong, and there was the acquisition in the UK and Singapore, KL. We're doing some work in the US as well now, as you know. How does it feel for you, having gone back to that day when you and Paul decided you were driving across Australia, you were going to make this new company? How do you feel today, Nick?
Incredibly satisfied. I mean, it's not finished, and I don't think there is a finishing line. There's still lots for us to do and lots of opportunities. But if I won't bore you with our prospectus back in '99, but a lot of the stuff that we talked about in our prospectus, as you touched on, starting a business in the UK, building a business in Asia, expanding in Australia, we've done those things. So now there've been plenty of bumps along the way. Some things went quickly, some things went a lot more slowly than we expected. We had SARS and September the 11th and, the global financial crisis, all of which were pretty big kicks in the shins. But where we stand now is it's incredibly satisfying, and I love it. I still every day am delighted and excited to be involved. Genuinely, that's not just corporate speak. I love being involved.
You don't do corporate speak. That's one of the first things I learned about you.
I definitely no. Hopefully, no weasel words from me.
So just taking you back through the growth and development of Ambition, then there was a period that you've just alluded to there, which was, golly, was it about 94? No, sorry, 2014, 2015, where things probably had developed in a way that you hadn't wanted or seen, and you needed to almost get control back of Ambition. Do you want to share some of your thoughts around that?
I think the main thing around that time was I had got the wrong people involved, and probably one in particular hadn't done enough thinking or due diligence on this person. And as I touched on earlier, people who, in hindsight, I couldn't really trust and were not values driven. And it had a terrible effect on morale. There was squabbling in the boardroom, and the staff could tell that they knew something was wrong. And that was that was sort of 2013 mostly, and that was a very unpleasant time. Thankfully, I was able to do some positioning and get ourselves through that. But interestingly, when those people were no longer involved, I decided what I need to do was go to every office, speak to every single person in the company, tell them exactly what had happened in some detail. So there were no, elephants in the room, and exactly what the plan was, which was back to basics, stick to the original plan, clear leadership. And within 6 or 8 weeks, we'd gone from, a seriously probably quite unhappy company, not going that well, to morale recovered so fast. And I really, I really didn't do anything all that clever. I just was straight with people.
Yeah.
And, I think that is so important. People can tell if you're not being straight, or indeed if you are being straight. Yeah. And, obviously, in particular, you say, we're going to do that, and then that's what you do. So, in, going through that nasty time, in some ways, perhaps refocused us on the basics and, the right style of leadership. So we came out of it strongly, thankfully.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I remember you coming to every single office and speaking to everybody and being so open. And that really was a big turning point, wasn't it? So, and it came from the heart. And as you say, the values system that is very dear to all of us with our values of pride, ambition.
Interestingly, I think maybe one of the sort of drivers behind that was, as we touched on earlier, we listed the company on the stock exchange. Obviously, doing that, you have lots of disclosure requirements. You have to tell everybody what I'm earning, what the status of the company is. You can't hide anything. And whilst perhaps to begin with, you might find that a bit intimidating. Once you're in the groove with it, it's just the way you do things. You just communicate pretty much everything that's going on so that people are in the loop and they feel trusted and so on. That became a very, very important thing for us, for sure.
Communication is always at the heart of everything, Nick, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
People feel that they don't need to worry about what's going on, what's the future of the company, and they can focus on doing their jobs. Then it's so much better. So, but yeah, you touched on Hong Kong, so I might just go back to that. So Hong Kong was the first office that we started outside of Sydney. So Paul moved back to Hong Kong. Not long after we started up there, SARS came along, and that was very, very severe in Hong Kong. And for 3 months, we didn't make one sale. And I can remember the board meeting in month 3, this was the group board meeting, tabling the topic of, well, should we keep going? Like, this looks horrific. Thankfully, we had a director on the board who lived in Hong Kong. We brought on because of his Asia knowledge. And he said, you've got to hang on. You've just got to keep the shingle out there, because Hong Kong has a habit of going through difficult times, but always bounces back. And, how about that as a prediction for what's happening? So thankfully, we did hang on. We got down to a very, very small team, but we did hang on, and Hong Kong's now our largest office. We've got an incredible team of people there. As I said, Hong Kong's for sure changed massively, but still one of my favourite cities and an incredible place to do business. So that again was wise advice. I suspect, were it not for that director that we had on the board, that we might have pulled out, and that absolutely would have been the wrong decision, bearing in mind what's happened. So it's just so good to have these people around who've got experience complementary to what you have, and whose views you value.
And I know that there's, as you mentioned, there's been some lumps and bumps on the way, but always come out better, stronger, more focused. But I also know that COVID was one of the most challenging times for us as a business, and something I think was the first time that you genuinely have thought that there was a worry there for you. Do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So I remember before COVID, my last trip was right at the end of February. I was in London. You might remember we were doing some insurance bits and pieces, and it was sort of blowing up at that stage. And I came back through Singapore, which was one of the early sort of hotspots, and that was kind of, I was a bit blasé about it. But then when I got to Singapore, this perhaps isn't so good. Anyway, the whole thing blew up, and business literally plummeted, and nobody been here before. Like we had financial crisis before. You know how those sort of things play out. But a pandemic, obviously we'd had Spanish flu, that's 100 years ago. Pandemic wasn't in anybody's memory, didn't know how it was going. Business confidence collapsed. And Q2 2020 was, I had some pretty dark moments. I just couldn't see the bottom. And I did have a couple of times where I talked to my wife and said, this might be it. We might not be able to get through this. It's possible we need so much capital to get through that it just might not work. Thankfully, one of the things that happened was some very, I feel, enlightened government policy in various of the jurisdictions that we were trading in was a big help to us, and indeed many businesses. So when we got into Q3 2020, things didn't exactly improve super quickly, but they stopped getting worse.
Yeah.
And there was talk about vaccines coming along. So it was dark for a while, quite dark. So in Australia, for example, we qualified for a thing called JobKeeper, where employers you had to meet various hurdles, but were paid to keep people on your payroll. And that helped enormously. And there were, as I said, similar schemes elsewhere. So it was very worrying. Having said that, obviously when you're facing something of that, severity, it really makes you concentrate. And as you remember, we started meeting as a leadership team every week, Thursday nights, and that was fantastic, both in terms of practical decision making. How do we deal with this? What do staff think about that? What do we do with this type of client? Those very practical things. But also, I think in terms of supporting each other, because the way COVID played out, it was having more of an effect here at the moment, but here's not so bad, and then it would swap over, and so it really brought that leadership team close together, which was great in itself, but also very powerful because everybody on the team could tell that was what was happening.
Yeah.
And we'd each communicate to our people, what we talked about the previous week and decisions that were coming about. So, I wouldn't want to rush back into it. I do think we've emerged quite literally in the best shape we've ever been in. The leadership team is so unified. We're more focused than we've ever been on sharing ideas and collaboration. So so it was a pretty big low, followed by last year was our best year ever, I think. But financially it was definitely the best year ever. But also in terms of culture, I think we're the happiest company we've ever been. So
culture is so important too as well. It's not just a tick box exercise, which probably leads quite nicely onto a conversation around ED&I, equity, diversity and inclusion, because you were an early adopter of that. And I think probably your strong, amazing wife may have some impact on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, for example, gender diversity, I literally get confused when companies won't give women the opportunities that they deserve. The prospect of not having equal pay for equal work. I just don't get it. Why would you do that? Why would you think you're going to get away with it? Why would you think that it's going to be anything but poisonous for your culture? So that just confuses me. So I just think it's just a normal, natural thing to do, to give people opportunities, away from gender. Obviously, Australia is a country of immigrants. I'm an immigrant to Australia. We've had great experience in employing new immigrants. They are often seriously motivated. They move from somewhere to, in our case, come to Australia. And so, that's been good for us, but that just makes sense to me. It's just, I don't sort of feel I'm doing anything amazing. It's just, that's just good for everybody involved.
And I think, again, at the heart of what we do and ambition is around values. So if you didn't believe, Nick, chair and founder of Ambition, didn't believe in it, then it wouldn't be able to be a living and breathing exercise. And we talk about it a lot. We're just about to launch a global initiative as well for Ambition to really focus on different elements and cultural nuances and how we can really help support and move that agenda forward. So I think it's just an incredibly positive thing to be part of an organisation that is not just a tick box exercise, which is great. And what about then for you? What have been your highlights? You shared some of your challenges with us. What have been the major highlights for you over your career?
Obviously, moving to Australia, that was, had to sort of hold my breath to some extent, but Australia's been incredibly good to me. Met my wife here, started the business here. So that move,
so they are Australian.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that, after that conversation with the Gruff Cockney in London, that was huge. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but setting off with a plan when we started Ambition, and not necessarily sticking to that absolute rigidly. If we had X as part of the plan and we think, well, no, X actually subsequently that's not quite right, so we'll do Y.
Yeah.
We don't slavishly stick to things, but to end up with an organisation today that is quite like what we described 24 years ago when we started, that's also, that is very satisfying. A couple of people when we started were not necessarily all that positive about our prospects, and to be able to achieve things when people have made some slightly snide remarks, I have to confess that is quite,
Love it.
That's fine. I mean, the Asia piece, Asia between Hong Kong, Singapore and KL, that's 2/3 of our business now. So we are kind of an Asian company that for historical reasons has a head office in Sydney. That's incredibly satisfying because Asia's not that straightforward. I mean, it isn't a question of just saying, right, we're going to start a business in Hong Kong, off we go, and you sort of guaranteed success. And then most recently to go to KL, which is a developing economy. It's a Muslim country. You couldn't get more different to Sydney or London than going to KL. But that is now a fantastic team of people and a really good part of the business. It also houses our shared services centre. So a lot of our internal, accounting and technology and collections, cash rolls, and so on are based in KL. So Asia's been huge, and I personally enjoy going to Asia. The melting pot of the different cultures and the excitement in business. Sydney and Melbourne are great cities. But from a business point of view, they're very domestic. You go to certainly Hong Kong and Singapore, and they're massively international, and that's exciting. That's really exciting to be building a business in those places. So, and I think we passed the barbecue test, so that is definitely a highlight. So,
big tick and great food, not just barbecues, great food in general.
That's right. Last year, having a great year financially, that's all well and good. But if I felt we're straying from our values and people at barbecues are perhaps not saying that good things about Ambition, I wouldn't be very satisfied with that. So I genuinely think that we've remained values driven, and that that people more often than not say quite decent things about us.
And what about your other location offices, like London?
Like London. So,
for example.
Well, we've been on a journey in London, haven't we, Nikki? Since Brexit, Brexit came along, the vote, and certainly surprised me. And I think within 3 or 4 days, I was in London. And between us, we took the decision to exit the financial services side of the business in the UK, which had been quite good. But I became firmly of the view that we weren't special in financial services, whereas we were special in professional services. And if we focused only on that, then we could really do some good things. So we decided to do that, and I think that decision's been vindicated. So that the UK business obviously had a very, very tough time during COVID, but has nicely responded. And obviously now we're building a US business out of London. So 4 people in London working primarily on New York and Washington, DC. Early days, but that looks very exciting. I feel like that's going to work. And we are only doing legal marketing. So all of our clients are law firms, and we're only doing marketing recruitment. I think that's fantastic. What an elevator pitch. So, Nikki, what do you do in the US? We do legal marketing recruitment, full stop. You don't need to say anything else. But I just think that's great. And it, as I say, look, it's early days, but the signs look good. So that's very exciting. We're also doing
wide mile deep, Nick.
That's it. We're also doing a little bit of business in India out of Singapore in the software space. That is seriously early days, but that could be quite interesting. And in Hong Kong, we've started a business that we're calling Amtech, which is an IT services business where we put teams of people together, essentially do software testing. That's been going a couple of years, and that looks fantastic.
Really exciting.
So reasonably bright and up tempo at the moment,
which we love. And I know that also one of you never waste a good crisis, as we say. And so one of the positives of COVID was it gave you the opportunity to really think about the repositioning and also to play to your strengths. So you've recently moved into more of a strategic advisory chairman's position, and Chris Auckland, who was the regional managing director for Asia, has stepped up into a global managing director role, which again really plays to his strengths and the attention to detail piece as well. So that's a positive in the next iteration of Ambition, isn't it?
Definitely. I'm so pleased that that we did that. I mean, Chris is at the right stage in his career and has the right DNA to understand all the technologies that we use, to be able to relate to the 24-year-olds that we're hiring. He's a great leader, but he's really close to, the reads that are in the business. Frankly, the technology stuff from a detail point of view has passed me by. I know all the things that we're using, but Chris is much more skilled at that. So for me to be in this executive chairman role has me sort of prodding and poking and thinking about the US and thinking about other expansion and trying to overcome problems. And I think that plays to my strengths. So that's been in place for 12 months now, and I'm delighted. I think it's really good.
Very well. So what's next for Ambition, Nick? You alluded to it earlier.
The good news is that to keep thriving and growing, we don't have to, reinvent the company. We're always looking at change. We have teams of people internally trying to come up with innovations, but overall, our industry is in a pretty strong position. We're in a strong position as a company. So I touched on 2 or 3 new things that we're doing. That's all very exciting, but they're not revolutionary in terms of embarking on totally new things. So we're working on doubling the business over the next 3 years, and we can do that if we get it all right. We can do that within the things that we're doing today. So I think that's very exciting. It equals lots of career opportunities for people internally. So just because we're not going to charge off and, at the moment anyway, open an office in Bangkok, doesn't mean to say that there aren't career opportunities. There are lots. These 4 people we have in London doing the US, 12 months ago, they were doing different jobs. So those are the career opportunities for people. So
we're building better futures everywhere, Nick. I love it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Building better futures is our mission. I like to think we're doing that. So very focused on growth, but playing to our strengths.
Yeah, doing it in the right way. And where do you think hybrid working sits in with all of this? And it's one thing that our clients are asking us continuously. What is everybody doing? What is the answer? What is the answer, Mr. Waterworth, to hybrid working?
I don't know whether I have the answer, but clearly with the pandemic, work patterns changed quite violently and out of necessity. And I don't think, quite rightly, we'll ever go back to where they were. So I think for most businesses, not all, totally remote is a pretty serious challenge. And, I certainly can't see us going totally remote. But hybrid works. It's certainly working for us. There are some challenges. For example, early career people, so people who've, who are 1 or 2 years into their career, so still learning a lot. You just learn more by being with people than you do by doing this formal Teams training session. That has a part to play, most definitely. But the best way people learn is by, if you could sit next to her and listen to what she does, because she's been doing it for 10 years, go to some meetings with her and she'll model away. That's the best form of training you can ever get. So I think hybrid is great. I think it allows people some, really good benefits in terms of flexibility. But for us, totally remote, I don't think would work. I think it would be less practical, definitely less fun. So
it's important as well. That's one of the things that you mentioned about the start of your career, that it was fun and that you've enjoyed your job continuously through that period of time. So it's really important that there is an opportunity to experience working with different kinds of people, different, from all different cultures and diversity. Is so important that I think that it's good to have a hub or a opportunity to work in an environment with other people.
I absolutely love it when I hear laughter in an Ambition office. I genuinely, I think that's absolutely fantastic. So work should be fun. Yeah, it's serious and it pays the bills, it pays the rent or pays the mortgage. But you're just going to do it better if you're having fun.
Yeah.
So, and fun can mean, and definitely does mean, different things in different places. We talked a lot about Asia. Some ways they do different fun than we might in Australia, but it is important. It's not just a fickle thing to talk about. I do think in terms of culture and helping people get the best out of their career. Yeah, so very important.
Super. So, words of wisdom. What little gems can you share with everybody, Nick?
I think study and work in things that you really enjoy. Or put the other way around, don't go to university and study law because you think that's the right thing to do. Don't work in this career because you think that's the right thing to do. So you're going to have a better life if you're doing things that you enjoy. And as I described, I definitely fell into recruitment out of the vagaries of doing well at statistics at university, but I would have stopped doing it had I not been having fun and enjoying it. So I do think that's really important. Yeah, so concentrate on that. We've talked a lot about values, and I can't stress enough how important that is to me. But if you get that right, I think it can supercharge a company and your ability to attract and retain people, and have a purpose without necessarily having a long, involved written description of what your purpose is. You might well do that, but if you've got the values right, that's going to, I think that's going to set people on the right path. And then also I touched on, have mentors, formal or informal, people that you perhaps have a different skill set to you, people who you can trust. When we started the company, sort of similar concept, having two of us as business partners was so useful because we had different skills, but also, when we came across a problem, having two people to solve that was great. So that was very good. And I certainly, if people, I think that's great when you're starting a business. But outside advisors and mentors, I think is
really important. Yeah, invest in yourself, I think, is a really important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Nick, I have to say it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time. I think there's so many takeaways for people. And from me, and I'm sure lots of people that work at Ambition now or have previously, a big thank you to you and Paul for actually creating Ambition, because I genuinely believe it is an amazing place to work. It'd be a bit strange if I didn't believe that. But, culture and values are at the core of our business, and it is a great business. So thank you.
It has been a pleasure.